Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Thursday, July 30th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. Wednesday afternoon, the ACC released a list of 10 conference games for its members, plus Notre Dame, and announced that they're planning to each also play one non-conference game. That is probably the first big step towards a 2020 college football season. My guest today is Brett Ciancia of Pick Six Previews. Since 2012, he has released an annual preview ranked as the most accurate in the nation by Stassen.com. Brett, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Tom, for having me. I'm excited to talk here. Like you said, I hunkered down from December till June, writing this thing every year, all 65 Power 5 teams and conferences. And once it hits the shelves, it turns to talking season. So I've done about 60 shows the last 4 weeks and thrilled to be back on another Ohio State show.
Well, there is definitely a whole lot to talk about here. The big news, I think, with the ACC schedule, other than the fact that there is something of an ACC schedule right now, they don't have exact dates right now, but it's they have, these 5 games are going to be home, these 5 games are going to be away. The big news there, though, is Notre Dame is in the ACC at least for 1 year. What do you make of that? What kind of impact could that have on Notre Dame, Clemson, and the rest of the league?
Yeah, well, on a very high level, just in terms of college football history, I mean, Notre Dame is one of those quote-unquote blue bloods, one of the historic programs across all generations. And they've been playing since the 1880s. And this will be the first time ever they're in a conference officially, which is pretty incredible. Some thought it would never happen after they turned the Big Ten down or that deal fell through. So here we are. I mean, I think it's very interesting that they scrapped both divisions. That's another part of this element. They took away the Atlantic and the Coastal breakdown of divisions. Now it's all 15 teams competing together. The top 2 will get the 2 spots in the title game. Not just that, but it's going to take me a couple of days to digest all these schedule changes because it's not, they didn't keep the existing ACC games as 8 and then add just 2 more. They pretty much scrapped the whole thing and built out 10 games kind of randomly. So a lot to break down here. We could talk winners or losers between the new scheduling. UNC avoids Clemson. Miami avoids Notre Dame. So in terms of those 2 that would have been on the Coastal, maybe they get a break there, but the Clemson and Notre Dame matchup is still intact. That was scheduled to happen anyway in November before this pandemic. So that's still on the slate. This time it's a conference game, and this time might be the first of 2. So a lot to break down with it.
Yeah, that's going to be very interesting because Clemson plays at Notre Dame at some point during the regular season. We don't know the date yet. That was originally scheduled for November 7th. But then because there are no divisions this year, it's just, like you said, the top 2 teams, the way the Big 12 does it most years. That's how the ACC's doing it this year. You could have Clemson versus Notre Dame Part 1 and Clemson versus Notre Dame Part 2. Clemson is a team that Ohio State fans have paid a lot of attention to the last few years for various reasons. And there has been a lot of criticism that they have probably had maybe an easier path to the playoff than some other teams have in the nation. It sure seems like if Clemson's going to make it this year, they are really going to have to earn their spot.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I think that Clemson, and I'm saying this on an Ohio State show, I know this, but I think Clemson kind of gets a bad rep with that. The ACC was down last year. I granted that, definitely. But some of those early playoff teams that the Deshaun Watson years in 15 and 16 and even 17, they were going against some pretty strong Jimbo Fisher, Florida State teams that were a few years away from BCS contention. Going up against a Heisman winner with Lamar Jackson. Virginia Tech's always a tough out. BC is always a tough out. So, yeah, I mean, last year was definitely a down year for the league. And if it's any consolation, Clemson did show up against their non-conference foes. They have the best record against the SEC besides Bama when you consider all conferences. So they do well out of conference. But, yeah, so for 2020, this might be the most improved league in the country anyway. And then now when you factor in a top 10 caliber Notre Dame team, it's pretty tough. I mean, now you're talking 10 league games instead of 8. That instead of playing the Citadel and, Akron and all these other non-AQs, Clemson will go through 10 Power 5s for sure. And I think that last note about that 11th mystery game they have on there, it's a non-conference game that's got to be against an in-state team. So that's, obviously for them, that'll be South Carolina. So you're talking about 11 Power 5 teams. A lot of them will be ranked. A lot of them are improved. So, yeah, it'll be a tough slate for Clemson. Definitely tougher than last year.
Now, there are some reports out there that the SEC is looking at releasing something similar schedule-wise by the end of the week. As of the time we're recording this, that has not dropped yet. But, again, this is this is certainly some encouraging progress towards a season that the ACC is at least confident enough to release the broad strokes outlines of a season. The SEC looks like they're trending that way as well. And while we are still waiting in the Big Ten to put out its schedule, our Nevada Buck dropped some encouraging insider information of the potential for a season on the Ask the Insiders board on Wednesday. You can find that at buckeyescoop.com. But, all of this, it's all sort of trending in the right direction. And, I think everyone has been on something of an emotional roller coaster for the last, 3 months or so as far as a college football season goes. But, Brett, are you sort of more optimistic now maybe than you were a week ago, 3 weeks ago, a month ago, in terms of the likelihood of them really getting to play a college football season this fall?
Yeah, Tom. Well, I'm an eternal optimist. I've been optimistic this whole way. I see a lot of, pessimistic takes on Twitter by a lot of the media. I've been keeping it positive, because this thing evolves every day. It evolves every week. A month ago, we would have had no idea how it looks. And that's the same thing going forward a month from now. So I try and keep it optimistic. I think that there's, they're going to find a way to get it done. It's just so important to not just the student athletes who pour all their effort into this, the coaches too, but really, the whole athletic departments rely on football's revenue. So you're talking about hundreds and thousands of athletes, non-football related, that'll be impacted if they have to cut programs. There's that. There's also the small towns businesses that really benefit from the 7 fall Saturdays. That's the lifeblood of some of these small town economies where where these college campuses are located. So, I just feel bad for everyone involved. I hope they find a safe, feasible way to get it done. And I think they will. I think that they will. It's definitely optimistic to see the conferences moving. I think the worst thing is to be in no man's land where you're not hearing anything. It's just darkness. So just to see some tangible progress is nice. Now, one little thing in there that the ACC said in their release today was it's the top 2 teams that'll play in the conference title. But note there that they said the top 2 teams based on conference game win percentage. Now, they all play 10 games, so normally that wouldn't have to be in there as a clause. But that makes me wonder how if they're going to, maybe a team or two has a small breakout on the team if they quarantine for a week or two, that they'd still be okay continuing the season. So in a way, you never want that to happen. But I think having that clause in there makes it optimistic that they're going to find a way. Even if they get 6 games in, if they get 7 or 8 or 9, I think we're going to have football this fall, at least to start the season.
Yeah, for sure. That's an indication, I think, that there may be a plan B there where just as the Miami Marlins and Philadelphia Phillies had to scrap some games this week, but the rest of Major League Baseball is kind of marching on. Some ACC teams may play 10 games, others may play 8 or whatever the numbers ends up being. But that at least is a positive indication that there is a plan B there if something goes a little bit wrong. The start of the season is kind of I think probably the end of your busy time of the year. I think your off season sounds like it's your busiest time of year as you're putting the magazine together. Again, it is Pick 6 previews. And can you just share a little bit about how you got interested and started writing these previews and how you put each year's edition together?
Yeah, absolutely. College football is an absolute passion of mine. I'm based out of the Philadelphia area, suburbs there in PA. It's all Eagles talk. And growing up, it was hard to find great college football content out here. I'm not a Penn Stater by any means. So when you take that out of the mix, it's hard to find college football. So, I used to buy all the magazines and everything. And they do some good work. But I was always thinking that they could dig a little deeper, and then when you see some of the pundits on TV and on Twitter, the national guys, they stay a little bit too national for my liking. They're able to talk about Clemson and Alabama, but they're not really digging into the details. They're not really, they're not talking about all 65. So I kind of flipped them, I kind of shifted the mold where, this is a one-man operation. I launched it in 2012 as a college football preview website, just like the ones you see on newsstands, but online and in a digital download format. And over those first 7 seasons, I was graded the most accurate in the country for Power 5 predictions. And that's not just me saying it, that's Stassen.com, who grades all the ones you see on newsstands and online. For decades, they've been grading them. So by their formula, I was the most accurate in the country. And then after my 2019 book, I was selected to become a Heisman voter, which is the ultimate credential. I was blown away by that. And here we are in 2020. So, and then a little bit about what goes into the book. It's about 1,000 hours plus of film study, of calls with head coaches, calls with coordinators, calls with position coaches, calls with beat writers, local media. really digging into the local roots like that to get the real scoop and the real details. I listen in now. It might be 4 months later because I'm listening to it in February and March, but I go back and kind of relive the whole season, listening to shows just like this one to really get the fan reaction, to get the media reaction week to week. So, super detailed. I think that would pop off the page when you take a read through. But then the last bit of it is the analytics side where, I developed my game grader formula. I have coordinator grades, some advanced stats, some percentiles. But the difference between what I do and maybe some of the other ones you'd see is I put that back into very readable terms because it gets boring to read about, if Ohio State's 0.125 X and X metric, what or some acronym. What does it really mean? What's it telling us? So, I'm a numbers guy, but I'm also a football guy, and I love bringing the numbers back into very readable terms, talking coaching schemes, X's and O's, recruiting strategy, everything you could think of, and I think that pops off the page.
Yeah, I will definitely give this year's edition a plug right now. There is a ton of great information in there. Well worth your time to get a copy. You can order that at Pick 6 Previews, Pick 6 Previews, and 6 is written out SIX, pick6previews.com. And it is a digital download, so you can order it right there, get it right there without having to leave home, which is important to some folks right now. So before we get too far into the previews, I wanted to touch on, you talked about your game grader concept. I wanted to touch on that a little bit. I think a lot of people look at margin of victory, strength of schedule, and go, okay, well, this is how good the team is. And you get a lot more granular down to stuff like the differential between the yardage per play gained and yardage per play allowed. Can you explain a little bit about how you decided to do it that way, and then what that said about the 2019 Ohio State Buckeyes?
Yeah, absolutely. So game grader, you touched on it. It's a statistical measure of dominance. The quick spiel about it would be, when you see a team's record was 7-6, that doesn't really tell you much. I mean, obviously, it gives you the win-loss, but really, how dominant was that team? Was it an easy non-conference slate? Were those 7 wins blowout wins? Were they fluky 1-point wins? Right? Were they dominated by 300 yards? So, and at the same in the same sense, when you see a score come across the ticker on Saturday afternoon, 31-30, what really went on that game? Did one side of the ball? Did one team turn it over 5 times? Did one team, strike on a couple big plays? So long story short, I needed a way to numerically look at these seasons and games. So developed the game grader formula, scoring differential, yardage differential, per play metrics, turnover margin, but other things like explosive long yardage plays, efficiency plays, and then again, my coordinator grades too. So a lot goes into it. And I know that sounds like a word salad, but the most important thing to take away is at the end of the day, you get a score. But then I adjusted for the opponent's strength because, beating Cincinnati, that's a bad example. Beating Rutgers 42-0 isn't the same as beating Penn State 42-0. So it's scaled for your opponent's strength too. So it gets me a pretty good evaluator. One last difference real quick. Other analytics you see out there from other sites, some of them even factor in recruiting. I don't do that at all, actually. I think that recruiting is a very important tool. But when you look across the landscape of the country, certain programs really use their talent and live up to it, and others don't. So I don't know why you'd put recruiting rankings into your analytic formula. So this is really raw. What happens on the field? What happens on the in the games? That's your score. So So then how that applied to Ohio State last year? Well, if it's any consolation, I know it's not, but to Ohio State fans, Ohio State finished number 1 in the country last year in my game grader formula, above LSU and above the Clemson team, which I think you should have beaten. And I'm not just saying that because I'm on Ohio State show. Usually you see a 50-50 call go, one way or the other, but to have 5 50-50 calls go against you and none go your way, I don't know. I think that the better team lost that game against Clemson. Now, would they have beaten Burrow? Who knows? But, specifically 2019 Ohio State, when you look back historically, too, they're the first team since 1971 Nebraska. So you're talking 50-plus years to win 10 straight games by 24-plus points. Not just the score here and there, 24-plus every week. They were destroying everything in their path, except for, a goal line fumble by Fields against Penn State, and then I guess a bad first half against Wisconsin. But besides that, it was a perfect season. And the metrics show it. You all watched it for 14 Saturdays there. So, that's how they graded out last year.
Yeah, I think there was a pretty broad consensus that among Ohio State fans, at least, that was quite possibly the best Ohio State team most of them had seen, which would make it one of the best probably in the last decade or two of college football at the very least. You were actually a little ahead on the curve on that Ohio State team last year. You had them picked to make the college football playoff during your preseason picks. That was definitely not the majority opinion at this time last year. What did you see in last year's team that made you believe in them? And maybe more importantly, do you see it again there this year?
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for remembering that. I mean, you look back, the majority of the preseason publications had Michigan to win the East and the conference. And I was only one of 3 publications out of 20 that you see nationally. Only 3 of us had Ohio State in the playoff. What I loved was the defensive coordinator hires because I thought when you watch the 18 team, I mean, the offense was great under Ryan Day. That wasn't going to change. But the defense really took a slide in 18. I think it was too complex of a scheme. You had some complaints from players about how just complex and detailed it was. You saw the linebackers kind of hesitating in reads. But I knew the underlying talent was definitely there. So I liked bringing in Hafley, bringing in Madison, scrapping that, Harry Potter-sized playbook and letting these athletes run around free and fast. And you saw it. Just an absolutely incredible defensive performance. So that was one thing I saw coming in. And then also, a lot of people are hesitant when there's a coaching change or a quarterback change. But I try to dig into it. I mean, Ryan Day, we saw him for 3 games in September of 18. They went 3-0. You guys beat TCU that game. Those were some big games. We saw him as a coordinator all year. You knew he's an offensive genius. So I had no issue with Ryan Day taking over. With Fields also, you're talking about a 5-star quarterback. You saw his athleticism at times at Georgia. But really what perked up my ears was on a call I had with Brian Hartline back in April last preseason when I'm making my coach and coordinator calls. Brian Hartline, he was great. He was talking about his receivers, but then also talking about Fields, how he's really improving in the passing game and patient in the pocket. And, I kind of read between the lines and thinking, this is going to be an incredible performance by this offense. And everything clicked. It exceeded my expectations, the way this team performed. So, so that's what led me to the pick. And you guys proved me right, that's for sure.
Now, on your list of All-Americans this year, you had a lot of the expected Ohio State names on there, Justin Fields, Wyatt Davis, Shaun Wade, Chris Olave. But you also had an interesting name on the third-team defense, Zach Harrison. And he is someone who I think a lot of people around the program, including me, are expecting some pretty big things from this year. But he is not someone who is showing up on a lot of lists like that, especially sort of on a national, from a national publication instead of, people who are maybe a little closer to the Ohio State program. So what made you include him on as a third-team All-American preseason this year?
Yeah, when you take a look at my All-American and my All-Big Ten teams, you'll probably see some differences than most. I think a lot of times the magazines, like they say in the NFL, it's a copycat league. I think they kind of see who else everyone has and does the safe thing. But no, I take some gambles with those. With this one, with Zach Harrison, when you look at his freshman production, it was right there with what Chase Young did as a freshman. The stat lines are actually eerily similar. And then you take a look forward to 2020. Chase Young's gone. All those sacks, all those tackles for loss, that production's gone. Someone to step in is going to be Harrison. And you also get Jonathan Cooper back, who also, he earned all Big Ten honors back in 18 before the injury redshirt in 19. But I just see, could be the nation's best defense again, a top 5 defense. Someone's going to be performing, stepping into those big stats and the big sacks and everything. And I think that given his track record as a freshman, Harrison's going to step into that lead role.
And on the All Big Ten team, you had another guy who's not necessarily right at the top of a lot of people's list yet. And I think, again, you may be a little ahead of the curve on this one. Garrett Wilson, you had him as a second-team All Big Ten this year. He's another person who Tony Gerdeman and I, who are the 2 beat writers for the site, I think we are both extremely, extremely high on him going into this season. They're moving him inside to play the H spot. It just seems like a perfect fit for him in the system. What do you see out of him this year that made you put him second team All Big Ten?
Yeah, this is another guy that no one's going to talk about or put in their all conference teams, but I'm pretty confident with the guy. So I'll take you back to last spring game. Of course, spring games are another big factor that goes into my research. I'm one of those guys watching every spring game I can get my hands on. Obviously didn't have that tool this year, but going back to last spring game, the 2019 spring, I remember he made an incredible play. Now, this is an early enrollee freshman at the time, going up and high pointing the ball over a great secondary, right? And that kind of caught my eye, thinking, you know what, maybe not this year because he's going to be buried behind a big wide receiver crew, but definitely 2020. So I kind of had him on the back burner, obviously a 5-star prospect. But then what we saw towards the end of the year, I think it was against Michigan. He had a breakout game, 120 yards and a touchdown. And that kind of solidified it to me that, with all these other guys heading to the pros, he's going to step up to be at least the number 2 in the rotation behind Olave. And with Justin Fields coming back in this offensive scheme with Ryan Day and what could be the best offensive line in the country, you just know production's going to be there. Stats will be there to be had. And I think he's going to get a lion's share of the catches with Olave. So you're looking at a 1,000-yard receiver. And, as shown the glimpses you'd expect out of a 5-star freshman. Now here he is, second year on campus and ready for a breakout.
Now, we don't yet know exactly what Ohio State's schedule is going to look like. We know they are not going to play the Oregon game, so that in and of itself probably makes the road to an unbeaten regular season a little bit easier. But even with the understanding the conference schedule is still up in the air, which Big Ten opponent do you think could present the biggest challenge for this year's Ohio State team?
Yeah, so the only other Big Ten team that I have in the top 10 preseason is Penn State. I have them 9th. I have them 2nd in the East. I would have said that would be the hardest game for Ohio State. Now, that was before we knew that, stadium capacity would be reduced or actually almost knocked out. Of course, this was a year where you had to travel to the whiteout. An experience I've seen, and it's absolutely incredible. I mean, I think it adds almost a touchdown. You always talk about a home team getting 3 points. I could even argue they get 5 or 6 with that whiteout. And, but I'm getting sidetracked. But, no, I think Penn State would have been the second-best team in the Big Ten. Now, with that said, I think there's a sizable gap because when you look back at the series, you think of 16, they had the blocked field goal and the fluky win there in Happy Valley. 17 and 18, Penn State really dominated for most of the game, if you remember those games. Had big halftime leads, had fourth-quarter leads, but you got to credit Ohio State with crazy fourth-quarter comebacks. Now, that shifted last year, in my opinion, where I know it was only 28-17, but you take out the Fields fumble at the goal line, you take out, they had a backup quarterback playing some wildcat and some hero ball there. I think that game really, Ohio State dominated them. And I think the gap really widened. And I think I see it widening even more this year. Ohio State's just an absolute machine. There's no more concern, if there were any, from other people about Ryan Day taking over as a head coach. Now Fields is a proven commodity, a Heisman candidate. There's a sizable gap between Ohio State and Penn State.
Well, outside of the Buckeyes, the one team that Ohio State fans are most interested in, of course, is the Michigan Wolverines. They are headed into the 6th season of the Jim Harbaugh era. His contract is up after 2021, which is still deeply weird, and I am not sure quite what to make out of that. But as you said in the magazine, it is basically Groundhog Day in Ann Arbor every year. What do you see out of the Wolverines this year?
Yeah, it's exactly right. It is Groundhog Day. I mean, you're going to have a great defense with Michigan. They're going to come up, they're going to dominate their unranked teams. It'll be some gaudy numbers like holding teams to 100 yards in a game or beating somebody 50-0. But then against the top 25, they come up really small. The defense gives up a ton of yards. Their man-to-man, aggressive man-to-man schemes break down against crossing patterns. Ohio State's done it the last 3 years. The better athletes take over. So, yeah, you'll see a great defense. But what I talked about in the book really is, obviously everyone talks about the 0-5 record against Ohio State. That's obviously a huge monkey on Harbaugh's back and kind of been defining of the rivalry recently. But almost the game within the game with Michigan and Harbaugh is that his lack of developing a quarterback. That was his thing coming in. He was a quarterback guru. He turned 2-star Andrew Luck into the first-round overall pick. He was always great as a quarterback coach in the pros. So when you bring him to Michigan, you'd expect at least some all-conference talents at quarterback and almost some program shifters at quarterback, and that hasn't come true. And that wasn't a lack of talent. You had a 5-star kid with Shea Patterson who couldn't live up to the billing. But what I put in there is really this is the final straw because now there's no excuse. It's 2 handpicked recruits by Harbaugh and his staff. It's some top 200 prospects. You have Dylan McCaffrey and Joe Milton. They're both 6'5" players. I mean, these are guys handpicked, like I said. So I think the story within the story is Harbaugh's got to produce an all-conference quarterback and get stable, and not just stable, but great quarterback play because it's year 6. I mean, a quarterback guru like him has got to have great quarterback play. And to match that defense, I think that'd be enough to get them back into the top 15. But yeah, so that's the storyline within the story this year for Michigan.
All right, last question. We'll get you out of here on this one. It seems like basically everyone has the same playoff field predicted. It's some combination of Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State and Oklahoma and Clemson. You have a couple surprises in your field, Florida and Oregon. What do you see out of those teams that other people apparently are not seeing?
Yeah, and before the listeners turn off the podcast with those crazy answers, remind yourself, like you said at the top, I had Ohio State last year, which was laughed at by all the media. I also was the only publication in the country to not have Alabama, and a little help from Joe Burrow there knocking them out, but that came true. So yeah, the first two are chalk. It's Clemson and Ohio State. You can put them 1-2 or 2-1, however you want it. They're the two best and most complete. From there, I have Florida. I really liked, this is a weird offseason. I'm sure we're tired of hearing it, but without spring ball, without summer camp, without a fall camp, I really relied heavily on coach continuity, scheme continuity, quarterback and returning starters, that kind of thing. With Florida, they have it all. It's the third year under Dan Mullen. He's had quarterback success everywhere. You're talking Alex Smith at Utah, Dak Prescott, Mississippi State. Fourth spot was Oregon. Now, right away, obviously with the Ohio State game scheduled, I almost chalked them up as a loss for Oregon right away. And this was published in mid-June before the cancellation. Thought, all right, even if they lose to Ohio State, is this team strong enough to go 9-0 and Pac-12, win their league, and get in as a 12-1 conference champ? And my answer was yes. I mean, the numbers say it. The tape says it. When you think of Oregon, you think of the old Chip Kelly teams, the speed, the gadget offense type thing, and they come up small in the big game. But that's no longer the case. Mario Cristobal built this from the inside out. He's an offensive line guru himself. He's got the Outland winner and Penny Sewell. But really, it's the defense which shines for me. They were a top 5 unit last year. They returned 10 of 11 starters. And that one opening is going to be filled not by one, but by 2 5-star linebackers coming in. So just incredible talent. And the last bit on the talent there is, for the first time since the 1990s, a program has passed USC as the number one recruiter, 5-year average in the Pac-12. So Oregon's got the star power, the great defense to hold them through, a great offensive line, and I think kind of a down year in that conference that they're going to be able to run it 9-0.
Well, if as we mentioned before, if you are not that excited about heading out to the store right now to grab a magazine, you can get this year's Pick Six preview right from your home in just a couple minutes. Brett, let people know how they can get a copy.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's Pick Six Previews on Twitter, and then online it's pick6previews.com. And on there, I have a couple sample teams, so you can see the level of detail I go into for all 65. See the set of graphics that I have for every team, and then also some testimonials. Just got one in from Chris Fallico, College Game Day, which is pretty cool. So yeah, go check it out at pick6previews.com. And for those interested, also you could type in Buckeyes at checkout and get a nice discount code to give back the Buckeye Scoop and the listeners. I'm always excited to talk football with Ohio State fans because unlike the programs on the coasts and in the pro cities, you guys match my level of passion, right? I mean, I'm doing this all 365 days a year. I feel like Ohio State's right there with me. So yeah, would love to get back to the base. Type in Buckeyes at checkout.
Awesome. So Brett, thank you guys. Thank you so much for joining us. I will throw in another plug. There is an absolute ton of interesting information in there. I have been going through it for a couple hours. I am not anywhere close to all the way through it. Every team has its 5 best and 5 worst games for every Power 5 program in the last 5 years. Really interesting and intuitive, color-coded stats. So much more, so much detail. Brett, thank you for joining us. You can follow Brett, as he mentioned, on Twitter at Pick6Previews. His website is pick6previews.com. And as he said, you can use the code Buckeyes for a discount at checkout. So, Brett, thank you for joining us. Thank you guys for listening. Have a great day. We will talk to you tomorrow.